Hello, welcome to the Transforming Trauma Podcast, a complex trauma podcast through the NARM Training Institute. My name is Sarah Bueno, and I am a psychotherapist in Chicago. I am also currently a NARM student, and I'm so excited to be sharing today's interview with you. Transforming Trauma is presented by the NARM Training Institute. The Institute offers NARM practitioner trainings for mental health professionals who are looking for advanced training in complex post-traumatic stress disorder. The NeuroAffective Relational Model is a cutting-edge, innovative approach for resolving CPTSD, addressing attachment, developmental, relational, and intergenerational trauma. Today's guest is Gina Essex, and Gina has been in private practice for over 15 years, working with adolescents and adults who've experienced developmental and complex trauma. She has a special focus working with first responders, primarily individuals in law enforcement, along with firefighters and paramedics and their families. In addition to her full-time practice, Gina is a master-level NARM therapist and senior training assistant for the NARM Training Institute in North America. I really hope you enjoy my interview with Gina Essex. Hello, Gina. Welcome to Transforming Trauma. How are ya?
Hi, Sarah. Thanks. I'm doing great. I'm happy to be here and I'm excited.
Yeah. So we like to start this podcast off very much like we start a NARM session. And so the first question is for you, kind of our contract. What would you like listeners to get out of your interview today?
Well, I guess I'd like listeners to walk away with a better idea of how complex trauma affects humans, specifically a deeper understanding of how the effects of trauma changes humans and why it's so important for everyone to know that the effects of trauma can be healed over time, that there's hope.
So maybe a good place to start is, we're doing this podcast to do just that, really kind of give more of a broader understanding of what trauma is, what complex trauma is specifically. So how do you define complex trauma for yourself?
Well, because it's complex, it makes it difficult to define. In a broad sense, I would say complex trauma is a profound misattunement in childhood where the environment's unable to meet the needs of the child in sometimes in chronic ways and to different varying degrees. And depending on the degree and the type of abuse or neglect or misattunement, the developmental trauma can be an outcome. And then that coupled with events that are either perceived life threat or actual life threat of a person, whether it be a child or an adult, whether it be chronic or acute. It's oftentimes the combination of both of those together because it's the meaning a person makes from the things that have happened to them or to their life or how they take themselves to be. And I think that complex trauma is a culmination of those things.
Yeah. And I think for me, Gabor Mate was the first person I heard say that trauma isn't necessarily the thing that happened to you. It's the way that we make meaning out of the thing that happened to us, or it's the failure of the environment to respond in a nurturing way.
Yep. I would say that is a great way to make a very broad category a little less broad.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious what led to you working with complex trauma and specifically NARM. I mean, we haven't even really introduced who you are yet. So if you want to take that time to kind of share with us the work that you do and then specifically how you came to working with complex trauma.
Sure. Let's see, where do I begin?
Right. Where do I begin?
Right. Yes. Okay. In 1998, I switched careers and I was pregnant with my second daughter and decided to stay home for a while. And I had been a personal trainer and a nutritionist for quite some time, and I became certified in those two things. And so I did that as a part-time hustle while having my second child. And during that time, I had many clients who wanted to make changes, behavioral changes, lose weight, get healthier, etc. We would lay out a plan. They would begin to make progress toward their goal. Then they would stop. And it was this thing that just continued to happen. So I wanted to know why. that's where my motivation was coming from, is if people say they want one thing, why are they doing another?
That is the existential question, right?
Right, exactly. Right. And so, including myself,
Yeah.
I'm not out of that at
Right.
all. So that's what piqued my interest. I went to graduate school. I worked in a general practice clinic, a medical clinic with a group of nurses and doctors, and I was the behavioral health consultant. And so I learned a lot about how autoimmune diseases and diabetes and a variety of medical conditions also seem to have a component of this wanting one thing, not getting it, and or trauma in the background from their history with the autoimmune diseases. And again, I was interested in that, and I wanted to know why, like, what is causing this? I wasn't so interested in the medical model of eliminating symptoms, although that was important, or managing symptoms, and that was important. I wanted to know what was causing them, which is not real popular at the in the medical model.
Wait, doctors didn't want to listen to a therapist? That's shocking. No offense, doctors.
Right. No offense. And really, at Grand Rounds, it was consistently said to me that was anecdotal information I was bringing, which,
oh my God,
not evidence-based, which is true. It was just my experience, but that fueled me to continue. I graduated in 2005 and began my private practice then. And throughout that time, I just learned while I was with clients and going through my own therapy, and also just wanting to know more about why is it that people want something. And I'm pretty sure that they're capable of getting it, and they start to get it, and then they don't. And so another thing that happened throughout my private practice was people would say, I know I'm not bad. I know it intellectually. I understand I'm a good person. Then why do I feel so bad?
Exactly. I had that same question to my therapist, because I was like, I've got really high self-esteem, but why do I feel like crap all the time?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. And so that was just the ongoing things in the back of my head that I wondered about and wanted to know more about, and continually searched for through, going to some different classes at universities, or going to some postgraduate certification, or reading or what have you. And I just could never get to, nothing ever quite could answer that question. Right. So then one day a client of mine mentioned the term developmental trauma in 2013. That's what I said.
Tell me more, client.
Right. And she didn't know much about it. She just said something about that term, and she didn't know about it. She heard it. So I was literally sleeping, I don't know, a week or so later, and woke up, couldn't fall back to sleep. And that popped into my head again. What is this developmental trauma? I Googled it. And Dr. Heller's book, Healing Developmental Trauma, popped up. Exactly. So I read it, which is unusual for me, because reading was something that was, I tried to do, but a lot of these books they have a lot of big words, right? And so they're not very accessible. Right. But I literally read his book within 2 or 3 days, because it spoke to what I was searching for.
Exactly.
And it made sense. And then I thought, I need to find this person, or I need to get more information. So then I contacted somebody, I can't remember who. They told me a training for the NARM training was going to be happening in the Bay Area in a few months. And so I live in Michigan, and I signed up to go to California 6 times over the next 2 years to become trained, because I knew that there was something here.
Yeah.
And if not, I was going to be in California in the sun, and that's great too.
Right. Yeah. If it sucks, I'm in California. That's great.
Exactly. Right.
Oh, it's so serendipitous. I find a lot of the times the things that I stumble upon, I don't even remember how I found them. It's just kind of divine intervention, like plops them into my lap. And it sounds like that's how this happened for you. It's so cool.
Yep. It's those little inklings that, or little hunches, or just little nudges that I feel internally, and I follow them when I can.
So since 2013, you started your training?
Yeah, it was either 2013 or the end of, I can't remember when I started. I think it was in June of 2013. Yeah, it was. And then that was almost a 2-year training.
And we should tell folks you are one of the lead assistants. I think you're the OG, aren't you? The OG assistant?
Well, well, I don't know about that. Yes, I am a lead training assistant.
Well, let's dig into your work, because I'm really excited to hear more about the work that you do with first responders. So how does NARM work fit with that population?
Because first responders are human. That's
what?
mainly,
Oh.
Yes, I know. That is the word on the street, and I'm here to confirm it's true.
Mm-hmm.
And what I have found, and of course, this is anecdotal information, Sarah, by the way, because
it's clinical knowledge, right?
Right. But what I have found is that it seems as though people who work in law enforcement, in firefighting, emergency services, paramedics, military, that these people run toward danger. They run toward life threat. They see life threat. They experience sometimes direct life threat, either by an accident in a fire situation or by when they're doing their job, providing medical help for people. Sometimes they're in danger. And then also, of course, law enforcement who, the criminal danger that they sometimes are in. And so they're trained to go against their normal human instinct to get away from danger. And so to me, that is the flip side of what they're dealing with internally. So they're running toward danger, and that maybe necessitates them to run away from themselves in order to run toward the danger.
That's exactly what I was thinking of, because we talk a lot in NARM about shutting down that connection to self. And it's so interesting, because I've worked with medical professionals too. And there's something about the jobs that we go into that have to do with our own childhood wounding. And then I find people get in the most stress when their professional self then bumps up negatively against their home self, and someone is asking for them to show up in a different way. Or for some of my clients too, then their professional self, because they've lost access to that capacity for connection, then there's something missing. There's something that just doesn't work anymore.
Right. And oftentimes they will be more connected with the people at work.
Right.
Because they're able to connect in ways that are more suitable to them, really, in many ways. That doesn't mean that they would prefer that. Right. Or that they don't want their personal relationships. However, there is a way that the work relationships become easier to connect with the coworkers. And so NARM is really helpful in that. Well, first of all, I talked about the danger. Okay. Second of all, oftentimes the people who work in these fields are responding to what other people need, what other people want. And again, it's a way that I've noticed that when I ask them what it is that they want for themselves, this could take hours, days, months, that's not an exaggeration, because there's a way that what they want for themselves gets deeper over time, right? But it can take months for them to really connect with what it is that they truly desire versus they want the conflict to go away. Let's start with there, they want to put the fire out in their relationships or put the fire out in a symptom that they're having.
Can we dig into that a little bit? Because I think that would be really interesting to show the development of that. So let's take, John Doe or whatever comes in and he says, I want to put the fire out in my relationship. That's what I want for myself. And you use that as the contract. And then over time, how do you see that shift? What do they end up coming up with over the weeks and months and then potentially years that you end up working together?
Well, what I would say to John Doe is I would explore what's fueling that fire that he wants to put out. I would definitely be contracting around what's fueling the fire or exploring it. And I'd be spending a lot of time around, and what would it be like when the fire's out?
Right.
Because the fire's there for a reason. So those are the three main things that I would be curious about is what's fueling the fire? What would it like to be out? And always keeping in mind the fire's there for a reason, at least for right now. And then typically a person would consider what's fueling the fire. And it will certainly be a bunch of complexities within the person, needs that are there that aren't met, ways of being misunderstood, ways of not being attuned to, ways that John Doe is having difficulty attuning to others. And so by going through the different ways that the fire is fueled, John Doe would then be able to have more clarity around how he contributes to the fire and also what he needs so that he doesn't, so whomever he's having this problem with, that he recognizes what he needs so he can communicate to that person what it is he needs versus just shutting down or something like that. So
and the vulnerability of that for someone who is used to being armored, right?
Exactly. And so that's a good point. It's the fire is there. The person will be armored as a result, right? And so that goes toward what will it be like if there's no fire? Well,
right.
No, there's not a reason for the armor, you see. And then we will start to explore what it would be like to not have this armor and start to recognize the ways in which armor may feel safer. And when in session, in NARM sessions, specifically as a person, John Doe feels more safe and more trusting of the space. And with me, he is then able to not be as armored, to be more open, which fosters that growth in him in a wider and deeper way outside of that narrow way of having to show up, which we know are, the survival strategies. So there's just this way that John Doe starts getting wider and deeper and more open in relationship in the therapeutic alliance, and then has more capacity as he takes it out into the world, into his family relationships and friends, and even with general public.
I'm curious though, because I think this population in particular I think all clients are up against mountains when it comes to like doing their own internal work and then going home to a system that is not necessarily supportive of this. And when I think about first responders and the environment that's created, I mean, the way I've heard some of the firefighters I've worked with describe, it's like a fraternity. It's like a fraternity house.
Yep.
And that is not a place where vulnerability is celebrated, right? So how have you seen people shift given that it's not necessarily comfortable for them to use these skills in their relationships at work or maybe their families or whatnot?
Oh, that's a great question. What I've noticed is in the support group that I started with 2 officers about 2 years ago, 2 retired officers, there's a way that as the group of, in this case, I guess they're a group of officers, and some of whom worked closely with each other, and some of them just knew of each other from the same department. And what we would do is I would do a NARM session with one of them, and the others would observe. And they would be in this therapeutic alliance together and witnessing this therapeutic alliance. And as one of them would become more vulnerable, then the others were also able to experience their own vulnerability, and they felt safer to do so. And they have said that repeatedly over and over and over. And so taking that idea and expanding on that and having other first responders, people from fire, people, EMTs coming in, that, each of them have their own culture and their own fraternity, so to speak. And the common thread is that stigma of don't show your emotion, don't cry, you'll look weak or you'll be weak, and people don't want to work with you, or you won't have our back, or you'll be shunned if you speak. So what we're doing is going directly against that stigma head on. And it really evokes more vulnerability, because I think it's something that they so desperately want and are terrified to actually experience in an environment that they're not sure is safe.
We've spoken before about how similar our populations are since I work with addiction. And, one of the reasons that we always do addiction treatment in groups is for that exact reason of watching somebody else do it first.
Exactly.
Somebody who may have a little bit more tolerance for vulnerability goes first, and then people see what happens, and then there's space for other people to feel inspired to follow that. And also, we don't talk about it this way in NARM, but I do think about the power of both empathy and self-compassion in this work, because the empathy in the group, right? Seeing that other people have been through it, they've been through the struggle, they're on the same boat that you are. And then what NARM really does is I've seen it elicit self-compassion. I think that's the best way to put it, because we're not trying to draw it out. We're not trying to make it happen, but it just happens as a result of calling on that connection to yourself and your agency.
Yes. Yep. I agree. And another area that seems to evoke self-compassion, especially in the group setting, when there's an ARM session that happens, and then afterwards the observers, will describe what their experience is. And most of the time, they want to help, right? They want to do something because they're watching this and they see that this person's really having some strong emotion or struggling. And just by them saying that out loud, that, that they were noticing their own experience and they wanted to help so-and-so, John Doe, who's in the chair, in the hot seat, they call it.
Of course they do.
Yeah, of course they do, as I do the voodoo or whatever they say.
Right.
And as each of them, talk about that they just wanted to help, wanted to do something, that opens up a whole new space to talk about when we feel helpless. And that so much of the charge is coming within us because we are all helpers. And, I'm a different kind of helper, but we can all talk about that and what it's like to not be able to do something and just sit with another person. And then I notice an uprising of compassion for each other and for themselves. When they recognize like, oh, all of this inside me is happening because I'm trying to help someone, I'm trying to fix something, I'm trying to get this person out of pain. They don't take it to mean that they're weak because they're feeling. Recognize, oh, it's because I'm human. Right? And both of them are human qualities, right? But one is, it's the meaning. Again, this is where the developmental piece comes in. It's the meaning that they're making of their experience.
Right. I'm just remarking in this whole conversation, there's a lot of things that you've said where in the clinical space, I'd want there to be silence to just let it sit there. It's so interesting being trained in the model right now and learning about that importance of just creating space. I'm just noticing how clear it is to me when you say something that needs to be sat with.
Exactly.
To just let it breathe. And if I listen back, I'll be able to point those out. So maybe we'll put it in the show notes or something for the moments where just letting somebody sit with the idea that, oh, this is just human.
Yeah. And while they're recognizing that this is just human, this is the other thing to recognize, at least that's helpful for me, is I'm going to trust the process.
Right.
And I'm going to trust this person's capacity to heal themselves because they're in the process of healing themselves. And it is a very sacred space and not to be overlooked. And my job is so much easier since I've started doing NARM because I'm able to recognize areas like you described where it just needs to be silent. I don't need to think of anything or do anything. And in fact, if I do think or do, I might be getting in the way of this person's natural process.
And Gina, you are poking me right in the heart right now. I literally just had a consultation on a couple clients that have really got me hooked. And I'm almost feeling like I'm in grad school again, because I remember being a young therapist and feeling that pressure to save everybody. And I think there's something about what happens with a client who's experienced trauma that hooks me that same way. And when you said, I trust in this person's capacity to heal themselves, like my internal self was like, no, they're not going to get it. You have to fix it. And I just continue to hold faith that if I continue to work with the model in this way, that there is going to be a time where I can internally get on board with that instead of just like trying to force myself to believe that. Because, you know, as therapists, we're trained to, much like the medical model, fix symptoms, or CBT is like, well, let's stop you from feeling anxious. Well, But the anxiety is a symptom and it's giving us information. And if we don't experience it, then we don't know what it's covering up. So
exactly.
There's a lot of gifts that I feel like NARM is giving me, and I'm, hearing from others. And that one of feeling like there's less pressure on yourself is, I can't wait to get there.
Well, it's, I know that place that you're describing, and it is a process, that I went through. It's also like what we were saying before, or I was talking about before. I look at it very similarly. My role is not to run away from the person's anxiety or try to get them out of it. I'm running toward it. Just like the first responder is running toward danger. I'm running toward the anxiety or the fear but I'm not really running. I'm just walking at a nice pace, but because we don't try too hard. Right?
Nice reframe. Yes. Right, yes. Right. I'm not running. I swear.
Right. Really, really. But you know what I'm saying? Well, I don't run from it, and I'm not afraid of it. I'm not afraid of their anxiety or their fear or their anger. And so that was a process that I learned, and I had to literally sit on my hands at times to remind myself that I don't need to do anything. That the process will unfold in front of me, and I can watch it, or I can keep fighting it by speaking or doing something. But again, those little reminders, across time really helped. When I saw it happen in front of me, then I was convinced. I knew it in my head, and intellectually I knew it, but I hadn't felt it. I didn't have that embodied experience of it. And as I practiced and, got consultation and started recognizing more of myself in that process, it started to unfold.
And this kind of leads into the next question, because I'm curious. Like I said, it almost feels like I'm in grad school. And I think part of what's so difficult as a new therapist is not having the experience of seeing the transformation of people really healing from certain issues. I know, at least, with addiction, that was the hardest thing. I started in detox. And so, I'm seeing a little bit of transformation, but you don't see long-term recovery. And so there was less of a bigger picture. But I'm guessing that with trauma work too, it's very similar, that the more that you see people blossom into this beautiful butterfly from the places where they started, that it's easier to trust and have faith in that process.
Absolutely. Yes, it's the gift that keeps on giving. For me, it's yes.
Yeah. Yes.
Yes. Yep. To see people start to live and not just be alive is, yeah. I get goosebumps.
Yeah. Are there any particular inspiring stories that come to mind?
There's so many stories. There's so many people.
Or maybe if there's a story of your first person who you saw that shift really happen, and then move from just being alive to living. I can speak of a few people that have a general theme that, where I've noticed, because there's themes, especially in the first responders category, of people who've been in their career for, decades, possibly 20, 30 years, and just build a certain idea in their mind of who they need to be in their daily life, and in order to do their job and to stay employed, right? And to do some really important work, whether it be being a detective, childhood sexual crimes, where they have to review tens of thousands of hours of horrific material. And they're doing that because they want to catch the people that are dehumanizing children. And, to have someone like that be in therapy and to be able to be part of his process of connecting back to himself so that he can feel emotion again. And when feeling emotion, he had to separate from in order to do his job. Right. Wow.
To keep people safe. It's electrifying. And I can feel the charge, through my body. It's just, it's amazing. It feels like a miracle to watch someone kind of melt into themselves again, and the ways that it's scary for them, and it's invigorating for them, and it's enlivening, and it's scary again, and there's these waves of emotion and energy that run through a person. when they come back to themselves, and a grief of the years lost in their relationships with their family. And I know that they're at that place when they're feeling this enlivenment, and then quickly following is, but why did it have to take this long?
Yes.
And all of the years. And then the gratitude of, but, all the people that I was able to put behind bars, or all the lives I saved, just all the ways they see both sides, and then come back to, and yep, this is right where I am. And this is where I am today. And what do I want for myself? I want to whatever, and whatever it is, it's usually in those moments where, that's what I meant earlier, is that's when they get to the point of being able to really feel what they want.
Right.
It's in those moments where they're looking at the past, looking toward the future, and also right where they are, and embodying themselves.
And it's just making me think, particularly for this story about someone who's been a detective and catching bad guys, essentially, to offer the experience of holding all of the complexity, right? Holding that, yes, there are people who've done really bad things in the world. And yes, I've had to disconnect from my emotions, and it took so long. And then being grateful for all these things. That particular job, it really, cops and folks who work in law enforcement, there has to be good guys and bad guys. Otherwise, they can't do their job. And so the complexity of really holding all these things is just so antithetical to the way these people have been trained and the way they've been living their lives. And so for them to be able to step into that with gratitude is like, I'm just in awe. It's amazing work that you're doing.
It feels like life transformation right in front of me. And I am so honored to be able to do this work with people. And it's humbling. I feel honored, and it's great to be able to help, because it's the most rewarding thing that I have ever experienced in my career.
Well, and we're coming close to the end of our time together, but last question, of course, is like a big question, but you talked a little bit about the relief of pressure that you feel as a therapist, but I'm also curious if there's anything else that you've learned for yourself working with complex trauma, working with NARM specifically, that has helped you, that you would want to share with other folks.
The pressure piece is a big one, because I know it's just one word, pressure. However, it takes many shapes and forms, and it's very complex. So there's ways that I learned that I can actively pressure myself or passively pressure myself, or in different roles I'm in, as a mom, as a friend, as a partner, in my job, at my career. So the pressure piece is something that runs through my veins, that I know in my bones. And so literally it has helped me in so many ways, just to recognize that I'm pressuring myself. That doesn't mean I'm not going to pressure myself. It means I could if I choose to, or I can choose to do something else. And so that opened up a whole new world of options in every facet of my life. And that really is what underlies most everything, I think. Now, as I'm thinking about it, because the pressure to know, the pressure to do, the pressure to be, when you take that out or open that up for consideration, having to know, having to do, or having to be can be very different. and so it's changed me. I have changed myself as a result of recognizing what I was doing, to myself unconsciously. And it's beyond words, really.
That's what I find is so difficult about explaining NARM as a model, is because this is really getting at the deepest parts of the way that we've been wired. Sometimes there is no language for it. Yeah,
it's the more that I have been in this process of NARM, learning NARM, of being a teaching assistant and practicing it, and just living my life through the lens of NARM, the more I realize I don't know, which in the past, pre-NARM, that would have been with that idea or that understanding that I'd have that I don't know as much as I thought I knew, I would apply more pressure to myself to know.
That's exactly what I was thinking. I was like, I'm terrified of that. Yeah.
Yep. And now I realize that, and it's been true all along. I've never known, right? But now I'm able to recognize that, accept it,
yeah.
Feel relieved by that.
Yeah.
So nothing's changed other than I've accepted that, and I don't pressure myself to change reality.
And I don't know how you feel about this term, but for me, that feels like a spiritual awakening.
Yes. I'm a different human being today.
Well, is there anything else that you wanted to share with listeners or anything that you wanted to talk about as we close today?
I'm really honored to be here talking to you and excited about what's in the future for you and for me and for everyone that's involved with NARM, past, now, and future.
Yeah.
It's exciting, and I'm looking forward to taking it around the world with you, Sarah.
Yay! My bags are packed. I'm ready to go. Well, just to kind of circle back to your intention for today, to helping people get a better idea of how complex trauma affects people and a deeper understanding of how people can be healed, I think you nailed it.
Well, I hope so. You know, complex trauma shows up in so many different ways that are covert and overt. And the more we can recognize it, the more we're able to approach it in a way that, you know, moves towards healing and not isolation, hopefully here.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. This has been amazing.
Thank you.
Wasn't that awesome? We so much appreciate you for joining us for today's episode. To find out more information about Gina and her practice, you can check the show notes or visit us at www.narmtraining.com/transformingtrauma. That's www.narmtraining.com/transformingtrauma. The Transforming Trauma podcast is brought to you by the NARM Training Institute. NARM practitioner trainings for mental health professionals are offered across North America and internationally. The NARM Training Institute also offers the Inner Circle, which is an online self-paced learning program intended for anyone who is interested in joining an international online community focused on healing complex trauma. You can find more information about these trauma-informed learning programs in addition to other resources on the website, www.narmtraining.com. Thank you so much to Andrea Klunder and the Creative Imposter Studios for producing and editing this podcast, and to Gina Essex for our album art. We look forward to building community and connection with you and changing the world by transforming trauma.